Hello, everybody. I've been doing this show such a long time now that every author seems to return. It's always nice to see old friends. Back in October of not 1921, that was a bit of an error. October of 2021, October the 14th to be exact, almost exactly 4 years ago. The writer Robbie Bach was on the show talking about a new book he had out at the time, a piece of fiction called The Wilkes Insurrection. And I'm thrilled that Robbie is back. He has a new book out. It's out in a couple of days on Tuesday, October the 21st. It's called The Blockchain Syndicate, a contemporary thriller. And Robbie is joining us from Chapel Hill in North Carolina, where he doesn't live. He's visiting the university. He's normally based in Seattle. He's an ex-Microsoft guy, so Seattle is his natural home. Robbie, congratulations on the new book. Did it really take you 4 years? Is that all you've been doing in the last 4 years?
Well, thanks for the congratulations. I do writing is one of the things I do. I also do a lot of board work in the nonprofit space. So this is sort of half of my time, and so I didn't start writing right away, and no wine before it's time, so to speak, and really excited about the outcome.
So this is your second career as a writer, so to speak, Robbie. You were Mr. Xbox at Microsoft. You were very successful there. And as I said, The Wilkes Insurrection came out in 2021, so it's been 4 years. A lot of tech people tend to write fiction, although they tend to only write one piece of fiction. Having gone through it once, they're not going to do it again. What did you learn from writing The Wilkes Insurrection that perhaps I'm not suggesting that The Wilkes Insurrection wasn't a good book, but how did that experience improve the blockchain syndicate?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, you learn a lot about core writing technique. In Wilkes Insurrection, I did the right thing, which was to really understand the background of my characters, but I did the wrong thing as a first-time author, which was in the first draft of that book, I tried to include all of it in the book. So the first draft of that book was 550 pages. So I literally had to cut 200 pages, mostly of which was backstory to the characters. And so that process was painful and difficult, and I think I got it right. I'm really excited about the outcome. But in the Blockchain Syndicate, I knew my characters. I understood the pacing that was required to get us to the right answer. And in fact, in the editing process, I was able to add a little bit more depth to the characters in the editing rather than trying to decide what things to take out. And I think it's always better as an author to be in the mode of enhancing rather than the mode of reduction. So really excited I love Wilkes Insurrection, really excited about this as a sequel.
A couple of months ago, we had another ex-tech executive, Gary Bengier, on the show. He talked about humanity's most existential threats over the last 100 years. Gary had been CFO at eBay, so another major player in technology. What is it about tech executives that encourage them to write books? I'm not suggesting all do, but do you think that your experience on the front lines at Microsoft or eBay has somehow triggered a need morally or aesthetically to write fiction, Robbie?
No, I think it's more about the creative process, honestly. When you're working at a tech company, you're working at a startup, you are in the business of creating new things. And certainly in my background, because I worked for 10 years on the Xbox business, not only were we creating new things, we were creating new stories and new characters and new adventures, so to speak. And so for me, when I left, there was this creative gap in what I was doing. I love the board work I do. I'm very dedicated to the nonprofit organizations I work with, but there is a gap to fill in my life, which is around creativity and about building new things. And so a book, ultimately, I wrote a nonfiction book first, found that nice from a writing perspective, but still not a creative process to me.
Yeah, and that book was Xbox Revisited, which probably you could have written in your sleep.
It's a really interesting book, in particular given what's going on in the country right now. But it's nonfiction, so it doesn't have characters, it doesn't have scene description, it doesn't have a lot of dialogue in it. And so for me, the creative process is where that comes from. And I think a lot of people who are in the tech industry are about creation and building. And so it's natural that some of them a few of them have gone into movies, a lot of them go into writing, some of them go into other creative energies.
Well, they can afford it, of course. My ears perked up, Robbie, when you said particularly what's going on in the country. I assume you're talking about the United States. So
Right.
what exactly is going on? Why is that relevant both to what you wrote about Xbox and perhaps to this latest thriller, The Blockchain Syndicate? What do you make of contemporary America?
Well, we're certainly going through one of those periods in our history that are really turbulent. There's a lot of change, and there's political change, obviously, and political turbulence for sure, but there's also social change and turbulence going on. Blockchain AI is creating a technical sea change in what's going on in the technical side of the world. So I just think it's a period where there's more uncertainty, more change, more excitement, maybe more opportunity as well. And so the reason Xbox Revisited is relevant is that is a book about strategy and how you use strategy to manage change. And actually, the second half of the book is about how you could use strategy to drive change in American policy. And so that's obviously has some relevance to what's going on. And the blockchain syndicate, the premise is that all this turbulence and change, somebody tries to take advantage of that and tries to attack our financial system, weaken by where we are with our national debt, and try to turn that to their advantage. And so it's very contemporary. It's very about things that are going on in the country and have been for a number of years.
Next week, I have Jacob Silverman coming on the show. He has an important new book out. It's called Gilded Rage, Elon Musk and the Radicalization of Silicon Valley. He had an excellent op-ed in the Times a couple of days ago. Teapot Dome, Watergate, they're nothing compared to this. And the this in this op-ed is what Donald Trump and his family are doing with crypto. What do you make of the current... I don't want to make this too political, Robbie. You're not a political writer as such. But what do you make of the current craze for crypto? I mean, you've written this book called The Blockchain Syndicate. Cryptocurrency, of course, exists on the blockchain. It's essential for it. Are you a little nervous about the current boom, so to speak? That might be a euphemism for crypto, and particularly the way in which America's first family is so intimately involved in it?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First of all, crypto as a concept, I think of as another resource that people can invest in, and not dramatically unlike gold or silver or any other natural resource that's a commodity.
Jumping in here, Robbie, except, and you know this better than I do, it's not real like gold or silver. You can't put crypto in a safe. I mean, you can put some numbers in, but you can't put a physical thing in.
No, you're right. Except that's of course correct. Except people's mindset in a digital age are that digital things are as real as actual things. And whether you agree with that or not, and I'm of a generation where that seems silly. That's why I don't invest in crypto. But there are people who see that as a valid asset. So there's the question about crypto itself, which I think of as just a different type of investment vehicle. I think it's highly risky. I think it's highly speculative, but many commodities are that way. And then there's a second question, which is, are some people turning it into a grift? And I'm not the specialist on this, but
what's your instinct, Robbie?
My instinct is that there's definitely a giant grift here. And I think
giant grift. That's my headline for this conversation.
Well, look, I just have to call it as I see it. I do think that people try to take advantage of the situation. Technology.
Although it's funny, I had a show a couple of weeks ago on grifting, and I noted that with Robert Redford's passing, I rewatched The Sting, one of the great movies of the 20th century, late 20th century. And it was a movie that was sympathetic to the idea of grifting. These days, we're less sympathetic, but maybe there's something instinctively, intuitively American about grifting, especially when it's the good guys or the supposed good guys who are doing the grifting.
Well, I think there's the ultimate question on any of these topics is who's getting grifted. And in some ways in The Sting, they managed to turn the guy who was getting grifted into a bad guy, and they turned the griftees into a good guy. And so there's this subtle protagonist antagonist thing that goes on when you're in the creation process. And the writers of The Sting and the actors obviously were able to turn the person whose money was being taken into the bad guy and make us sympathetic to the people who are doing the grifting. And so I think there's a little bit of a clever Hollywood turn there that takes place. When I think about the standard grifting, the people you worry about are people who are vulnerable, people who are older, people who are investing their savings in places they should, things like that. And that's the question you have to ask about what's going on in the world today, is how much of that is going on.
Yeah, and I was around in the 90s where in Silicon Valley, you were around too, where cab drivers were talking to you. We had cab drivers back then, that was pre-Uber, talking to you about the value of Yahoo stock. And it was clearly the time to sell, just as Joe Kennedy back in, I think, 1928 or 29 sold his stock when cab drivers were talking to him. So clearly it's always the weak, the ignorant, the less powerful who are grifted as opposed to the grifters.
And the way I think about this, and I think about Tamika Smith, who's my protagonist in the blockchain syndicate and the Wilkes.
And in Wilkes, yeah, Tamika has a career.
She does, and in many respects, she would see herself as somebody who's trying to protect those people.
There's the old truism, Robbie, that when you play cards and you sit around the table and you're not quite sure, when you're gambling and you're not quite sure who the full guy is, it's usually you. In the blockchain syndicate, are they grifters, and who is being grifted?
Well, it's not really so much in the blockchain syndicate. It's not so much people being grifted as it is a series of bad characters who are trying to take advantage of the financial system, who are trying to use it to their benefit, who are trying to bend technology in a way that hides what they are doing. And they are trying to build a classic money-making scheme off of that. Some of them actually have more incentives than just the money-making, but the primary antagonist, Lee Bowen, is about making money. And he's figuring out how to turn the financial system in his way. The book, just to be fair, doesn't explore too much who would lose, but it certainly poses some clear points of view about who would gain in what he tries to do. And he's very personally attached to his personal wealth.
There's even a Russian assassin in the blockchain syndicate. Isn't that a bit old-fashioned? Shouldn't we be having a Chinese assassin?
Well, it's an interesting question. You'll find in the detail that there's actually a Chinese angle in the blockchain syndicate as well.
I should hope there is.
And the FBI is not exactly sure which side is responsible for these things. Look, I think, what's old is new. And what's happened in Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union is a re-rise of a Russian oligarchy, so to speak, that it has intentions on expanding its influence and control. And so they will do that in any way they can. And the FSB, I'm sure, is quite as active as the KGB was in older days.
The current American administration, I'm not going to name any names, seems rather suspicious of traditional crime-busting institutions like the FBI and the CIA. You have institutions like that in the blockchain syndicate. Should we?
Yep.
Maybe is one of the unspoken assumptions in this book. I mean, it's not a polemic, but perhaps one of the political ramifications is that institutions like the FBI and the CIA are still reliable, and without them, we have nothing to deal with major international crime.
Well, what I would say is this: leave aside what you think of like the current leadership at the FBI or the exact leadership at the CIA today. Let's set that aside just for a second. Those, for our country to be safe long term, and for our country to have less crime and more safety, both internationally and domestically, those institutions have to operate well. We count on them to operate well. There is not a replacement for them. So If your view is that they're not working well today, then we need to understand that and fix it. If your view is they weren't operating well 10 years ago, we need to address that. But those are the vehicles for our national security, and along with the NSA and a few other organizations. So if we don't think they're credible, we have to make sure that we fix that. I in my books, the FBI is quite credible at what they do, and they have shortcomings because they're an institution. And I have a little character named Bryce Roskovich, who is a white hat hacker who secretly helps them along doing things that they can't do.
Speaking of white-hatted hackers, 100 years ago, of course, out of the ruins of the First World War, the American federal government created first the FBI and then the CIA. Do you think 100 years later, we, the American state, needs to build some sort of, shall we say, white hat hacking network suitable for the challenges of the 21st century, whether they're blockchain related or AI or any of these other advanced technologies?
Well, I'm not a specialist in our digital security arrangements within the government, but I would be shocked and massively disappointed if the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI already did not have a massive digital security effort underway. And I know for sure that they work closely with people like Microsoft and Google and others who have internet security issues of their own. So my strong belief is that those things are already in place. You don't hear much about them. They're not made famous in movies like traditional spies are. But I think we have digital espionage people hard at work. That would be my guess.
Is your heroine, who features both in the Wilkes insurrection and the blockchain syndicate, is she as savvy as you are on the tech front?
No, I would say she's not. That's not part of her background. In fact, Tamika and I don't have a whole lot in common, honestly, other than maybe our political values, perhaps. But she is Black. She served in the military. She comes from a military family. She's a woman. I am none of those things. And so,
well, judging from one of the photos when you left Microsoft, some people might.
No, that's not me. That's not me. That's a guy
named Jay
Allard.
For people watching, there's this photo of a man with long hair. I didn't think it was you, but the photo suggested it was.
That's a guy named Jay Allard, who was my partner in crime on Xbox, a brilliant technologist who now works, interestingly, at Amazon.
So is there a little bit of fantasy maybe in the creation of this Black female who isn't tech savvy?
Well, she's grounded in fact. So I've done a lot of research with folks in the military. I've done a lot of research, and I'm actually involved in a number of policy-related organizations. So she is grounded in fact. Her role in the Air Force is a real role. The way she acts is consistent with the way someone in the military would act. Her father was a general in the Air Force, and then retires during the Wilkes insurrection. So this is all what I try to do with these fictional characters. Is I try to ground them in fact and in place and in time, but the specific people are all made up in my head. And Tamika is a character of my own creation at a sort of a cultural and interpersonal level.
There's a debate, I'm sure you know it, within the literary community. Somebody like Lionel Shriver has gotten into trouble about it, suggesting that writers don't have, so to speak, the right to create characters that they know nothing about. So are you endangering yourself when it comes to being criticized by what some people call the woke crowd for creating a Black female heroine when you're a white male?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One, I don't claim to have any unique skill at creating that particular character. There isn't a single character in any of my books who are me. So the guy who's the head of the FBI is not me. The guy who's our white hat hacker is definitely not me. Tamika Smith is definitely not me. If you're a fiction writer, you are creating people most of the time who may have little elements and pieces of yourself in them, but who are fictional. So the thing I focus on is how much authenticity can I bring to that character? And what I have done and been pretty careful about doing is had people more like Tamika, people who served, women who served in the military, Black women who serve in the military and in government, read the book and say, hey, does that feel at least authentic to you? And I've had great positive feedback about that. But it's just like anything else. I could have somebody critique me for writing about Bryce Roscovich. I'm not a hacker. And they could critique me and say, well, why do you have the right to write about a hacker? You're not one. I just think when you're in the fiction world, it's you have to be authentic. You have to try to be as accurate as you possibly can. And you just have to recognize that you're creating fictional characters.
As I said, you were last on the show back in 2021. Those days, everyone was talking about Web3 and blockchain. Now, 4 years later, all you ever hear about, and again, you don't need me to tell you this, is AI. More and more fears now that we're in an AI bubble, a collapse, or indeed even not just of tech, but of the whole world economy through AI. If you were starting this book again, might you call the blockchain syndicate the AI syndicate? Is blockchain a bit old-fashioned these days, Robbie?
Well, look, it's hard to think of that tech as being old-fashioned given the prevalence of its usage and the role it plays in the economy. So I think it's absolutely current. Now, is AI current as well? Yes. And is there small AI elements in my book? The answer is yes. But I chose blockchain at the beginning of the writing because it's so central to what's going on in, as you pointed out, crypto, but in a whole set of other areas where the core blockchain technology is actually really important and quite powerful. And it's part of the theme of what I write, that technology is neither good nor bad. Technology is just tech, and it's a tool. And some people will use it for good and some people will use it for bad. And this is just another example of blockchain being a tool that can be used for good and is used for good, and a tool that can be used for bad.
Although some people would disagree. We've had a number of guests who suggest that AI in particular reflects values. It's not just technology. The technologists who build it, for better or worse, put their own values into it. Is that also true for technologies like blockchain?
I wouldn't profess to know specifically at blockchain. I will say the following: every piece of tech that gets created has some element of the creator's social norms and values in it. Think about social media for just as a perfect example. The whole set of technologies that are involved in social media. So much of the fight around social media is about the norms and cultural barriers it has broken. And so I think it commonly thought almost every technology has some element of quote unquote the creators in it. I think what people struggle with AI on this front is, some people position AI as thinking, as sentient thinking. And that is troubling for people for reasons that are obvious and quite logical. I don't think we're there yet. I'm not enough of a visionary to know if we'll actually get there. But I still believe AI is a tool that has great value, and there's things you can use it for that are really good. And yes, in fact, it can be used for devious purposes if people choose to do that.
But should we be surprised that blockchain has become a darling of libertarians, people who don't like central government, because by definition, it's decentralized?
Yeah, and yeah, people have adopted. People who like that technology, by and large, don't believe in central control. That's not super surprising. It's one of these weird dichotomies, though, that I wrestle with a little bit in the book, which is blockchain in some ways is the ultimate form of transparency and decentralization, as you actually propose. But it's also the ultimate obfuscation,
right?
Because exactly. you can't see who the people are. So if I were having a conversation with somebody who had that libertarian view, I would say to them, hey, I respect your right to do what you think and to believe in less government and all those kinds of things and less central control. but I don't think that means you have the right to be anonymous in the actions you take. And so that's the flip side of the blockchain equation.
Yeah, we've done lots of shows in the past, not that recently, on the blockchain revolution. Don Tapscott was one of the most articulate spokesman for it. It's this ideal of decentralization, not just in currency, but in corporate organization.
Yeah.
Is there anything in that, Robbie? I mean, Web 3.0 is no longer in vogue. Now everyone talks about AI.
Right.
But was there anything in the promise of Web 3, of this decentralized blockchain driven world, not just of currency, but of corporate organization and government?
Well, it's funny you raise that, because one instantiation of that is this thing called a DAO, DAO,
right,
which is a distributed autonomous organization. And that, in fact, plays a major role in the blockchain syndicate. And it is the way my bad doers shield themselves from being discovered by others. And so it's a DAO syndicate. Now, do I think blockchain gets used for good? Yes, I think it certainly does, and I think there are places and applications where being decentralized is probably valuable. On the other hand, take currency as the ultimate question. Would I ever want us to have the equivalent of blockchain replace the Fed? And the answer is no. I would never want that. So you make value judgments on how to implement technology and what implementations are good and what are bad.
Isn't a DAO syndicate a contradiction in terms?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, yes, of course it is in some ways, because it's decentralized, except in this case, it's controlled by one person.
Yeah, it's hard to take the idea of a DAO seriously. And it sounds like there's a degree of irony or skepticism, at least in your book, about them.
There is, but honestly, as part of my research for the book, I created a DAO. And there are tools to do it. And there's companies who are trying to make money creating those tools. So it's a real thing. Now, whether that's successful, I'm not suggesting that it's the AI revolution of the future, but it's a tool that's there. It's a technology that's live in the marketplace, and it's something people can use for a variety of different things. I think the most recent sort of visible application was a group of people formed a DAO to try to buy a copy of the U.S. Constitution. And so they pooled their money for that designated purpose. Nobody knew who anybody else was in the DAO. I think they ultimately lost in the auction, but that's an example of putting people together for a common purpose.
Speaking of the AI revolution, we haven't talked for 4 years. Are you surprised with the frenetic pace of AI technology, how it seems to have taken everything over the last 4 years?
Well, I think the misnomer perhaps is that there was a lot of AI happening before that. And we didn't think of it or call it AI until ChatGPT 4 was made public, and people went through that a massive adoption cycle. So I think the adoption of AI has taken place probably over a 10-year period, and the research probably goes back 15 to 20 years. So what's happened is we've sort of reached a tipping point in the quality of the output and the quality of the technology, and that has led to a meteoric rise. Now, do I think every investment in AI is going to pay out, and that all investors who invest blindly in AI ventures are going to make money? I'm not going to give anybody investment advice, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be people who are going to lose. And whether the quote unquote bubble bursts, there will be a reckoning and a sorting of those investments so that there are winners and losers. Right now, everybody's a winner.
So we are in a bubble, in your view?
I think we're in I think bubble's always such a strong term because everybody knows bubbles pop, and they always assume that's going to be some explosive event. I think we're in a place where people are investing in lots of things, probably at valuations that are a little unsustainable, and there will be a sorting. Some of those investments will pay out. But I think a large number of them won't. And that sorting is going to happen over the next year to 18 months.
Some things are changing all the time. Some things never change. Blockchain, AI changes the tech world, changes the economy. But the same companies seem to dominate it. You're a veteran of Microsoft. You
Sure.
were Xbox for a long time. You were Mr. Xbox. Are you surprised with the way in which these big companies stick around? Microsoft is obviously a very good example. Google, which was supposed to replace Microsoft, and now is supposed to be replaced by AIs, is still hanging around. How do you explain the longevity of a company like Microsoft?
Well, if I think about Microsoft, you kind of have to divide it up into multiple generations of things. I mean, what to me is powerful about Microsoft is their ability to shift gears over time. So the original company was based on the back of DOS, disk operating system that ran PCs early on. And then the company went through this dramatic shift to graphical applications and to Windows. And everybody forgets, everybody says, oh, yeah, well, that was easy. That was a very traumatic, difficult shift to make. A really hard transition. And the company did that successfully. And then you go forward and there's another shift and everything goes to the cloud. And so the company makes this shift to the cloud and transitions customers and successfully migrates a lot of their products to the cloud. And now you have AI and you have yet another shift. So to me, the thing that is impressive is a company at that scale and size making those tectonic changes and doing them successfully. That to me is a true skill. And you have to give credit to Bill Gates, to Steve Ballmer, to Satya Nadella for leading the company through those transitions.
But you were at Microsoft 1988 to 2010. You mentioned Gates, Ballmer, and Nadella. The Ballmer years weren't particularly strong. There are lots of controversies. The market valuation of Microsoft dropped precipitously. What did your experience at Microsoft teach you, not so much about technology, but about leadership?
Well, first, I worked for Steve for 7 years. And Steve,
directly, you reported to him as Mr. Xbox, right?
I did. And I learned an incredible amount from him. So I do think he's a great leader. And I think there's, anybody who has the opportunity to work with or for him will benefit from that. And if you're not watching his videos online at a personal level, he's a wonderful person. And he and Connie are doing incredible things with their foundation that will far exceed anything he did at Microsoft, in my view, ultimately. So I think there's good things. Now, he was CEO of Microsoft in a time that was one of those transitions and was turbulent. And, I think if you think about managing through that turbulence, he put in place a number of the strategic initiatives, which Satya was then smart enough to grab and add to drive the company to the next level. The biggest thing that was a challenge in that time of Microsoft wasn't even product strategy or direction of the company. The company needed a cultural shift. And sometimes a cultural shift means you need a new leader. It doesn't even necessarily mean the old leader was bad, but the culture had just gotten to a place where it was a little stale. And Satya was able to come in as a new leader and change that. And I think that was super powerful and really gave the company a next life.
In some of the interviews, you've talked about your Xbox journey from underdog to survivor to civic leader. Ballmer's doing civic leadership, as you say, in his foundation. The other great entrepreneur of Seattle, of that area, of course, is Jeff Bezos. In contrast to Ballmer and Gates, doesn't seem to think of himself as a civic leader. He had a very high-profile celebrity wedding earlier this year. Do you think that it's the responsibility of people lucky enough to make vast fortunes in tech to become civic leaders, a la Gates, a la Ballmer, after they retire from their tech jobs?
Well, look, I will say two things and try to be clear about my point of view in the process. I do think everybody gets to make their own choices. So, Jeff and others who have chosen thus far not to be as involved in civic activities as some, they earned those choices by doing great work. So I will respect those people. At the same time, I will say that I personally have always felt a need to give back. I think people who are successful, even if they're not financially successful, people if they just have success in life, have a lot to share. And I have certainly felt a obligation to give back. It's why I spend so much time with Boys and Girls Clubs of America and Habitat for Humanity and the Bipartisan Policy Center. I feel that desire and urge, and you can't fake that. So if it's not something you feel, it's a little tough to say, well, I'll just go create a foundation to pretend. You either have that feeling or you don't.
Final question, Robbie. The book is out in a couple of days, The Blockchain Syndicate. As I said, you ran Xbox for many years. Why'd you bring a book out? Why not just turn it into a video game so people can play it on Xbox? I know that a few days ago, Microsoft just brought out its first ever handheld Xbox console. Since you're such an expert, one of the pioneers of gaming, what's the value of a book as opposed to a video game?
Well, there's two sides to this. One is you have to look at the creator. So I am and have always been, and I don't toot my horn much, I'm a good writer. I know how to write. It's a skill I've had my entire life. I had to learn how to be a fiction writer, so that's an addition to my skill. But my core ability and my core communication skills are in writing. I know next to nothing, honestly, about the technical parts of writing code. I have no engineering background. I'm a business and
even though you're at Microsoft for 22 years?
Well, here, I'll make an important distinction. There are tons of people at Microsoft who are technologists, people who write code, who understand code, who are deep into the bits and bytes of how things work. And then there's a bunch of people like me who are product people, who see a created product and understand how to shape and form that, understand how to bring that to market, understand how to sell it. I think of myself as a product person, not a technical person. So for me to turn something into a video game would basically mean I would license the IP to somebody who knew how to do the creation process for video games. And I'd much rather use my core skill set in writing and create something that's interesting. That's the reason I go there. This is something I think is important. I think there's important messages. I think it's a great thriller. And I love the passion of putting a word down on paper.
Well, there you have it. The Blockchain Syndicate. It's out on Tuesday, a contemporary thriller by Robbie Bach. Robbie, I hope it won't be another 4 years till we meet again. Are you on a trilogy? Is there going to be a third book in the Tamika series?
Well, I will just say this.
I mean, I assume I don't want to give away the story, but I assume she survives the book.
Well, you'll have to read the story, but I will for sure do some more writing. I just love it too much, and I think it's the thrilling part is awesome to put together, and I think there are messages still to be said.
Well, October 2029 seems a long way away. I wonder if the world will survive till then. Robbie Bach, author of The Blockchain Syndicate. It's out on Tuesday. Congratulations, and I'll see you again in 2029.
I hope it's sooner than that, Andrew. Thanks very much.